Click.
Oh man, it's
And
gonna be
we're
a long
live.
show.
It is Tuesday, December 22nd, 2020, 5:01 p.m. Now, for those of you who do not watch the show all that often,
He's here.
I
we texted you his username.
We have a tradition on the show that whenever we refer to norms, we take a drink of whatever we happen to be drinking, which in my case today is an espresso martini.
Ooh.
You will see when people refer to norms, people in the chat immediately will type drink. Now, this brings up an issue with respect to not our Jonathan Rauch guest, but our Norm Eisen guest, who is not yet on screen because, I've invited him in and he is not yet responded. So Norm, this is the part where you click, accept, and we bring you on screen.
He'll be here.
He will be here. I want to point out that there are a great many things that we could talk about today. But really, this is a situation in which we are going to kind of let the guests go in whatever direction they want to go, because John has some stories he wants to get Norm to tell. Norm is going to try to resist telling those stories. And
I have no idea what's going on, so this is going to be just fun for me.
And, I'm just really going to sit back and watch and let the guests fight it out. Of course, that assumes we can get Norm on screen, which we're working on. Meanwhile, Jonathan Rauch, we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but it is always a pleasure to have you back on the show.
I am always happy to be on the show, though today I'm a little anxious because I think that crow lady may be a hard act to follow.
She was amazing.
Wasn't that fun?
I have not played that one yet. I save them and then take them on walks, but I know enough about crows to know they're incredibly smart and incredibly interesting, and that crow people are also incredibly smart and incredibly interesting. So
you say the same thing about you when you're not around, though, Jonathan. So it's
that I'm a crow and I'm incredibly interesting.
That you have to figure out.
So Kaylee actually was referred to us. Okay, so Norm, your system is being, I'm told, is incompatible with
maybe try a different browser.
So if you are not using a computer with Google Chrome, please try to follow the instructions that I sent you. And we will.
I would point out that Norm did ask for a tech check. This is why
he did. And
I could have done a tech check then. Kind of. It was kind of busy all day.
We're not.
We're not in the business of doing.
Yeah, exactly. Tech checks are really not within the purview of what we try to, because that would interrupt the flow of tech failures that make for so much of the show's joy.
So deeply true. I remember Jack Balkan was like borderline, like when he was disembodied voice, was like borderline horrified and like annoyed that we hadn't done a tech check. I'm like, we just don't do that. We just don't have time. We have day jobs.
When we have a sponsor, and when we are making money and we hire staff and technical, we all have the right equipment and we pre-interview people, then all the tech will fall. Yeah, look at Kate's face.
That's never gonna happen.
Do you want to tell Kate? Do you want to tell the story of
the Venmo diagram?
Of a Venmo diagram and our approach from the people we are going to net as our first sponsor on In Lieu of Fun.
I mean, I don't want to get out in front of it too much, but this is kind of a hilarious random things that happened to me story. Like other law professors get like invited to do talks, and I have emails in my inbox from Venmo asking me to do their marketing campaign. So what basically happened was that like a couple of months ago, I made a joke on Twitter that was a Venn diagram, and it was in one circle of the Venn diagram, it said Venn diagram, and in the other circle, it said overzealous autocorrect. And then at the intersection, it had a little the intersection was Venmo diagram, because like my phone kept correcting Venn diagram to say Venmo, the banking app. And I thought this was very clever, blah, blah, I put it up. And then shortly thereafter, Venmo contacted me, like a couple months.
It wasn't shortly thereafter. This was months ago that you
but
made
they
this
contacted me. They contacted me shortly thereafter. They said, can we use this image for free? And I said, no. You can. I was like, they're like, how much do you want for it? And I said, $10,000. I just made up a number of this image. It took me 15 seconds to make on a free Venn diagram app online. And so, and they were like, we'll get back to you. And didn't hear anything. And I was like, well, that's a good way to get rid of that. So but then they reached out again and were like, not only do we want to buy this image, but we would like it if you could come up with many more of them for us. Like, we want to come up with and I'm just kind of like, my dean is probably sitting in his office just being like, what do I do with this person?
So here's my idea for this brilliant idea for Venmo, which is that they should sponsor in lieu of fun. And in the mid-roll of in lieu of fun, right around the half-hour mark, we take a 2-minute break and design every day a Venmo diagram out of a Venn diagram. And audience members, we can bring them on to, it can be like, and now, Christopher Argyris has a Venmo diagram. And it'll be like a participatory part of In Lieu of Fun, brought to you by Venmo and their diagram. So if you're from Venmo and you're watching this, that's the plan. And you have no say in this.
So Kate, can you show us the diagram?
Oh, the one that got me the attention in the first place?
The one that got you the $10,000, to be more specific.
Oh, I did. I will say that hasn't been paid yet. So, in my mind, that's not like.
I mean, it is genuinely funny.
Isn't that hilarious?
It's a very witty little diagram. I called my friend
Molly. Oh, you know Molly now. Everyone knows Molly now because she was on the show. And she was just kind of walking through
Norm Eisen.
Hi, friends. Yep. I'm here from Zell to complain about the favorable treatment.
There's I just put it in the chat. We can't screen share lately, Jonathan. I don't know. It's really annoying. But
if you were Venmo and you saw that tweet, you'd be like, "Oh my God, we can build a whole campaign around this." So we're here for you, Venmo. Anytime you wanna, we've got an audience of hundreds.
I messaged Ben about this because I was like, person who really is not motivated by money, am going to be terrible at managing this. So help me.
We are totally doing this. We're going to fund. It's going to be the rival to Fox News is going to be built on the backs of Venmo diagrams.
And then we can drop our sponsor and pick up Zelle, and it'll be like Zelle diagrams.
And every single one of you, all 150 of you, were in on the ground floor of this. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have my two awesome Brookings colleagues, Norm Eisen and John Rauch, who have been putting their little heads together and thinking about what happens to the democracy protection movement after we have in office the highly threatening figure of Joe Biden, and and after Donald Trump is ousted and thrown out on the streets in Lafayette Square, where he will kind of paw up against the bars with making cooing noises like a puppy. And so, gentlemen, what's on your minds?
Hello.
Welcome to the show, Norm. Norm's thinking, what did I do to deserve this?
When Ben and John and I were cogitating over the weekend and preparing to come on the program, we were talking about why In Lieu of Fun has not yet equaled or exceeded the viewership of Fox News, or at least OAN or Newsmax. And now that I got to enjoy the first.
You don't know that it hasn't. They lie about their numbers.
They lie about their numbers. We never lie about our numbers. We have 147 people on this live, and we've got another 123 on YouTube. We've got 280 people watching this show right now.
Even applying the truth discount of those three outlets, the ratings don't quite line up. Anyhow, we are totally, speaking for myself, delighted to be with you and to share our thoughts in real time about the problem of I wish it were a smaller number, but the vast tens of millions who have been persuaded that the foundation of our democracy, our elections, are fraudulent. They're now crossing over to believe that the foundation of our public health going forward, the COVID vaccine, is also the injection of a barcode to track you. So dealing with that is the thing John and I are thinking together about, and we're going to talk with you a little bit about today. What do we do about them? And how do we turn them all into loyal In Lieu of Fun viewers? That is basically the crucial social problem of our age.
Well, but wait a minute. If they were In Lieu of Fun viewers, we would have a rebellion in the chat. Because one of the things about In Lieu of Fun that's pretty interesting is that the audience has become this really cool community of people who know each other, care about each other, greet each other every day, communicate offline, off of In Lieu of Fun. And so if we brought in, and they respond really badly to trolls when trolls show up. So, if you brought in the OAN viewership to In Lieu of Fun, you might actually have a little problem in the community.
It's interesting. But yeah, so what do you guys, so is the what you do about it the part that you guys are disagreeing about? Or is it the identification of the problem?
No, we don't know what we're doing. This all started like 5 days ago when Norm called me up. And Norm said something like, I'm not going to tell any dark secrets here. No black box secrets, Norm. I'll embarrass you only slightly. Norm said something like, look, according to a pollster he knows, between 40 million and 70 million Americans, depending on how you count, believe that Donald Trump won the election and or Joe Biden stole it. Mm-hmm. And there's a real risk that when Joe Biden becomes president, all the members of the coalition of all democratic forces, or many of them, will go back to their corners doing their parochial ideological things and being Kobu mongoose relationship with each other. And maybe we need to do something to stop that. Maybe we need to, what he called a Manhattan Project, and what I call a Band Together Project. That's new, Norm. I just came up with that. I think we should call our, whatever we do, the Keep the Band Together program, KTTP, whatever. Keep the band, KTBT, keep the band together.
KTBT, I like that.
How do we keep the band together? And then I said, well, look, Norm, it's not like no one's in this space. 1 million people are doing 1 million things, and they're really good people. And Norm said, but that's the point. How do we make sure they keep doing these things? How do we make sure it's more than the sum of the parts? So now we've started to talk to some folks, real world folks at think tanks and colleagues at Brookings, and solicit ideas for how to move forward. We have a few ideas, but they're pretty embryonic. And then we called Ben, and Ben said, yeah, we should do something like this. Let me hook you up with some other people. So that's how we're rolling, really.
So explain something about how you're envisioning the thing. Is this, if the band stays together, like all the people who've been working, or 95% of the people who've been doing sort of pro-democracy work over the last several years from across the political spectrum, keep doing it. So the band stays together, but 40 to 70 million people still believe that the election was stolen. Is that a win or a loss?
That's a loss. The democracy cannot, I hate to drag us out of the frivolous free association of the first 5 minutes, which, by the way, I was watching. I just kept texting or talking to all of you. I'm here.
Tech problems are part of it all the fun.
Yes.
We've gone a full 5 minutes now without anybody dropping off or failing. So, chill out, man.
So here's
who do you think we are, CNN?
So here's the I do not think that the forces of democracy, or Ben, as you and I would sometimes come to your Brookings office and we talk about the coalition of all democratic small d forces. They and sanity won, at least, and I say this in a totally bipartisan or nonpartisan way, because it's a strongly bipartisan coalition. Sanity won at the top of the ticket, and there was a judgment. I just wrote a book making the case to the American people that Trump must go, and they ousted him. But we won the war. But the 20th century is littered with examples of winning the war and losing the peace. I wrote in another volume about how that happened when an exhausted America quit the field after World War I, and then substantially did the same thing after World War II, and allowed the price we paid for that was the Cold War. By the time we re-engaged, the borders were drawn for the Cold War. So I think we have to win the peace. I don't think we can win the peace unless we find a way to bring a substantial number of those 40 to 70 million Americans back to believing in our democracy and its foundations. So in keeping the band together, Rauch and I are asking ourselves, so many incredible people fought for truth and morality, political and other morality in the past 4 years. How do we now stick together to win the peace?
Question. So, Jonathan, you wrote a number of years ago, and I forget the details, so I'm going to make them up, and you're going to correct me, about the extent of Nixon's approval rating at the time that he left office. And as I recall, it was something around 25% of Nixon supporters remained Nixon supporters, despite knowing everything that the rest of us did. Presumably, that is essentially as undemocratic an instinct to support Nixon, knowing what he did, is as anti-democratic an instinct as the current iteration that you guys are concerned about. So if you say 25% were, decidedly non-democratic at that point, and 40% roughly are decidedly undemocratic now, according to the standards that you guys are articulating, and I largely agree with. So my question is, how close to we didn't think of democracy at risk when the number was 25%. We do think of it as we could lose the peace at 40%. How far down does that number have to go? It's not going to go to zero, but Norm says a substantial number we have to persuade. So what does it have to look like in order for you to feel comfortable that we're in the post-Watergate era rather than the pre-apocalypse era?
What are you defining as the post-Watergate era?
In 1974,
just like 3 years after that, or like?
No. Jonathan's looked back and said, "Hey, okay. There's a substantial chunk of Trump's base that didn't even go away then. And by the way, it wasn't until his support started collapsing in the Republican Party that Republicans turned on Nixon." So But he didn't look back at that period and say, gosh, democracy was really under threat when Nixon left office in 74. So what's the difference between then and now? It seems to me it's 15% of the electorate.
Yeah.
So my question is, how close do you, how much of that 15% of the electorate do you and Norm have to win before you say, okay, we won the peace as well?
Well,
I want it in exact numeric terms.
I can give you a fairly exact answer, which is who the F knows. I can tell you the direction. I can't tell you the magnitude, but I can tell you a difference, very important difference between now and post-Watergate, which makes it more challenging for the likes of us. So the more relevant number for Nixon is that his Republican approvals dropped from about 85% at the start of his second term to, after all the revelations, after the tapes, when he was heard ordering federal crimes and the smoking gun and everything else, his Republican approval was still 50%. But tipping it down to 50% of Republicans and losing pretty much the rest of the country was enough to get the Republican Party to push him out. Okay, fast forward to today, after everything Trump has done, including collaborating with a foreign government to undermine US elections, then being caught trying to do it again, running, you can fill in the list as well as I can. After all of that, his Republican support is in the 85 to 90% range. So it's as if everything Nixon had done during Watergate didn't register with Republicans. So that's a challenge. And another challenge is that conspiracy-minded craziness is consolidated in Republican ranks in a way that was not the case previously. It used to have, lots of conspiracy theories, but they were all over the map, and a lot of conspiracists weren't well organized. They were disgusted with both parties and didn't participate. But now you've got organized phalanxes of them who have congregated in the Republican Party and are now a major constituency. So these things make it quite challenging. And I don't have answers about numbers. Maybe Norm does. I don't think there's no way you're going to convince everybody of anything. There's nothing new about conspiracism in America. For my book, I looked at the crazy things people have always believed. Absolutely nothing new about that. Majorities have no idea going back forever, like who's the vice president, how many branches in the legislature, nothing new there. So you don't need everyone, but you need enough people. So I think at least the number is shrinking and not growing, and the trust is increasing and not falling. And you need to figure out some things to do about social media and civics education. And you need to try to win some more Republican leaders who can maybe start rallying some more of the Republican base, maybe at the state and federal level. We don't know the answers. We just want to get together the people who can start to find answers. How'd I do, Norm?
You did great, John, as always. Not only do we not know the answers, we're not sure what the questions are. We know we feel that we see these tens of millions. We know that historically I love your chat, by the way. That alone is worth the price. It's amazing. That alone is worth the price of admission.
That's really good. Yeah.
We're going to show you something magical in a minute, Norm.
I've been going through and replying to some of the comments. This is an excellent media adventure for those suffering from attention deficit disorder. It's excellent.
You're gonna see something amazing in a minute. Before you finish, though, I'm going to set it up because we're going to use this to workshop. We're going to use the rest of this hour to workshop this idea. So, John and Norm have set up a problem.
No, they haven't. Sorry, I do want to say, their problem is that they don't know what their problem is.
Right. What is the question?
And then they want to know, when they've figured it out.
But I will state the problem for the sake of workshopping. The problem is, what do we do to reconstruct? I think this is the problem. What do we do to reconstruct the broken empirical and normative consensus that started unraveling? Really, it came at the end of the Cold War with the absence of a foreign, in my view, with the absence of a foreign adversary. in what do we do to reconstruct the minimum consensus? And this goes to Ben's question about quantity. The minimum consensus necessary for our polity to continue to make progress. That's what that's the challenge that I think we face, and then that throws off a series of questions and answers that we're uncertain about. And the one subset of that John's point about bringing the band back together, and of course, in lieu of fun, is one of these resistance era constructs where we've clung to each other for support in various ways to try to steer the democracy through. Which of these Trump era constructs endures, and how do we keep the energy moving forward into a reconstruction phase? That, I think, is the problem. Excessively wordy statement of the problem.
How would you articulate the problem, John?
I see someone just posted in the chat, the elevator pitch needs workshopping.
It was an exceedingly long escalator pitch, like you're trapped next to that guy. Go ahead.
Yeah. John. So we're gonna workshop this. What we're gonna do here. John's gonna give his version of the pitch. Y'all are gonna flag in the Q&A. Those of you who've already posted questions, go in and amend your questions to link them specifically to this problem, to the problem. I will start bringing people in, and we're just going to have at John and Norm over this idea and whether we can firm it up a little bit. Go, John. The floor is yours.
So I don't know. We started talking about this 5 days ago, but I'm thinking of it at the moment slightly differently from Norm. First of all, I like his statement of the problem writ large. But what I'm thinking about at the moment is more infrastructural. What I'm thinking about is you've got hundreds of organizations, thousands of top-notch people, many thousands of politicians who are working on actual problems like dealing with these issues in places, like county courthouses. And they're all doing great stuff and they're all dealing with aspects of it, but they're all disconnected. They're finding stuff out, but how do you transmit that through the system? How do you figure out what actually works in a place like Akron, Ohio, where someone's trying a new civics education program? How do you find out what arguments succeed and fail? What's right and wrong? We know that the old ways of talking about these questions are not good. So I think the goal writ large is to shore up public support in America for the fundamental liberal democratic epistemic, political, and cultural norms. Sorry, drink, everyone. There's a running joke, Norm, about your name.
I think that...
But I don't think we have the answers. But I think a lot of stuff is going on. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see people in better and more regular touch with each other.
Interesting. Okay, so can I respond? Ben, were you going to say something? Or
No. Go ahead.
I was going to weigh in on this.
I'm gonna start bringing people in, as people who just saw Alice flash up on the screen know. Mike Godwin is allegedly
coming through and.
Yeah, Mike Godwin is allegedly coming in as well.
They'll come back.
And
Mike Godwin can't come on until I make a Hitler comparison. So should I do that now?
Yeah. Well, you should. We sort of joke about that with him every time he comes on. But
it's getting old, huh?
I feel like
he hasn't told us to cut it out yet.
Long it's been since he's had that law.
So, Kate.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple of things that strike me about this problem. Like, one is your interest, I'm assuming you're talking small d democratic problem, because if you're talking big D democratic problem, that's a question of party and identity and culture and tribalism. Right. Okay. But the difficult thing about the small d democratic problem and about your identity of the problem as Republican politics don't believe that small d democracy worked for them in this election, and there's this fallout and kind of everything, is that you kind of have to rely on the Democratic Party and to a certain aspect of like reforming its mantle so as to take in people that are kind of in the marginal bubble, right? Like that might be like kind of like people that would support the types of policies that Jonathan is talking about. I don't know, like I hear this problem is kind of like a problem of like small town like tribalism and norms and concepts of democracy. And it reminds me very much of a study that was done in 2016 in Stanford and Columbia by, I think, Brookman and Kalla, which was like this study that basically like you could change people's minds on these huge issues like transgender rights or gun control or abortion only with door-to-door in-person type of interactions. And even then those interactions had only like a 35% staying power over television or radio conversations or phone calls. And I think that that's like I think that cycle, like it depends on which level you're looking to do this. If you're looking to institutionally build and you think that's going to be the solution, surely you can do that. But I increasingly am of the mind in all of the anecdotal stories that we all hear on Twitter or we have in our own lives, like having these individual interactions with people and having people have other types of ways in which they're tethered, like their political decisions are tethered to their identity in their communities, tethered to their their self-conception, or things like that. Those are the things that kind of make a difference. But if they're by themselves or in a community that reinforces whatever it is that they're already thinking, those are never going to change. And that like overwhelmingly strikes me as like true of like an small Appalachia town that doesn't have a lot of exposure to things, as it does some of my friends who are in various kind of like liberal media bubbles that never kind of encounter anyone outside of that. So that was just kind of, I think that's kind of the psychology element, I guess, is like the thing here to like bring in.
Yeah, there's no one right level of intervention, and there's no 1 or 10 things on a list that solve these problems. It's got to be a trial and error process involving literally millions of people. I mean, I'm affiliated with Braver Angels, which is dealing with polarization at the grassroots. At Brookings, we have, in the same institution, we have people coming up with a new contract for the middle class, which are some very creative ideas to actually deal with the problems on the ground of people whose paychecks have not effectively risen for 20 years and whose status is declining. We have people in our branch who are talking about, you guys at Arbiters of Truth are busy talking about disinformation. So it's going to be an all of society multi-level response. It's nothing that Norm and I can sort of captain or quarterback.
But like,
that's certainly not the point.
Are you also willing to move at all? Like I feel like you're starting from this conception of bringing people onto this team and this platform. But like, I think that mentality of an us versus them is part of the entire problem that you're also describing. And so like being willing to give ground in a certain, you know, and to recognize certain types of like things that you're willing to give up, like that might bring, like, this could be both a policy and a one-on-one discussion is kind of what I'm trying to say. I don't think people are willing to talk about that, by the way. Like, I don't mean that it's to challenge you. I just mean that it's like, are we all kind of willing to challenge our priors and like whether or not we're coming from the right advantage and like certain questions. I think some are more right than others.
All right, Alice, you get the first question today. Sorry, I brought you guys on screen earlier than it turns out I should have.
I hope my audio is decent.
Yeah, it's good today.
Great.
Okay. This is on my Linux computer, so it's a good surprise. So this is an optimistic theory from Sarah Longwell, which might appeal to me because of its optimism. But her argument is that humans are not supposed to be in isolation for 12 months at a time, and that just that psychological stress might be raising the temperature And, once things open up again safely and we can, see people face to face, I think you're right that there's a problem that stretches back much farther, but at least the short term, really high temperature might just naturally lower.
What do you think? Is this situation going to get better for let me extend Sarah's point a little further. We're in an economic disaster that's largely man-made in the sense that we actually intentionally and artificially shut down the economy to prevent people from getting sick. So in the next 12 months, we're going to have a significant economic expansion one way or another. And we're going to have a whole lot of people who are now stuck at home, as Alice says, and very isolated, suddenly being social again. And life is going to feel pretty good. Maybe this is actually, and happier people are more likely to be pro-democratic. And so maybe this is a problem that to some extent is self-ameliorating once you, A, don't have Trump, and B, make everybody a bit happier.
Well, it'll get better. If I were guessing, it will get better. There'll be some shrinkage, some number of millions moving in the direction, Ben, of your golden ratio of democracy, whatever the proportion is below which this quantum must drop for democracy to survive. But this is a tension that dates back decades, if not to 1865 or to the earliest moments of the Republic. It's a permanent problem of democracy. We've been, I'm reading What Hath God Wrought, the history of antebellum America, and describing the way these tensions, including around racial, social, economic, and political justice, have been baked in from the beginning. So no, I don't think the post-COVID bump is going to end the problem.
What do you think, Jonathan? Even if not end, significantly ameliorate?
Ameliorate to some extent, maybe, but I agree with Norm. Do I have to drink every time? Not when it's a proper name, capitalized.
No, just the audience has to drink every time.
Oh, and I see. All right.
Tom's going to be real drunk by the end of the show.
It's structural, and some things really are different now that make the system less resilient to the kinds of kookiness that we Americans have always, in our charming way, always been prone to. One of them is the consolidation of what I call the George Wallace vote in the Republican Party and all that goes with it. Yep. So you now have the control of one of the two major political parties is substantially controlled by a faction that is frequently not reality-based and frequently unmoored from key democratic norms. That's a major problem. Another is the evolution of the electoral system so that now primaries decide essentially who gets elected and who doesn't. There are exceptions, but for the most part, it's the primaries that matter, and they are increasingly dominated by the fringes of the parties. That's a problem in both parties, but it's tending to drive moderates out of running for office and out of winning office, and that's becoming a self-inflating spiral. And it means the political system is more and more at the mercy of people who don't share democratic norms. And that's something that's fairly new. And finally, it's, I guess, 20 or 30 years ago, you all know more about this than I do, but we kind of stopped teaching civics, really. So we now have a whole generation of people who just, it's kind of a revelation to them if you tell them what Congress is supposed to be doing. From their point of view, a lot of people, well, I vote for someone because, I like what they say and what they stand for. They're a cool person. And I could go on, but these are structural changes, and they make the system more vulnerable.
Speaking of Congress, Tom, a.k.a. Jim McGuckin, has a Congress-related question.
First, I wanted to show Kate my bolo tie. Okay, I wore it as an offset to her her rustic, hee-haw sort of outfit. But nonetheless, let me get to Congress.
Little too on the nose there, Tom.
Yeah, when I was watching the hearings, okay, and I do a lot of testimony. I get crossed all the time. I was just outraged. My fist was clenched in rage at the sort of idiocy that those hearings proceeded at. I mean, there was very little discipline. Congress wasn't enforcing the subpoenas. It just seemed to be a circus. And I'm sorry, maybe I'm trampling on feelings, but Norm, you were involved in that. And my question, what?
I have no feelings left after 30 years of this shit in Washington. My feelings washed out of me long ago.
Well,
oh my gosh,
is there any hope for reforming Congress at all on that?
All that's left of me is my cheerful nature, but no other emotions remain. It is a fair. It is only a half fair criticism, because I thought, and even at the end of our judiciary hearings, even the Republicans complimented Nadler on how serious and substantive he had managed to make them. And I thought there were many, like one of the hearings that I examined witnesses in when we applied the law of impeachment to the facts of the Ukraine case that the Intelligence Committee had passed to us. That was a very serious, substantive hearing, amazingly so. And people commented on it. There were other moments that were more circus-like. It's enraging that Congress cannot enforce its subpoenas. But on the whole, my impressions of impeachment were that it was, once we got to Ukraine, that we learned our lesson and we figured out how to hang on to the substance. And to bring that around in one or two sentences to today's problems, I do think we have to get past the clown car perception or environment or presentation of democracy, and we need to return to a more substantive engagement without confining ourselves to the coastal elites.
I want to suggest, in specific answer to Tom's question about what reforms could we do to improve the functioning of Congress in investigative settings. One thing that Congress did surprisingly well in that episode, and it got lost, was just the underlying quality of the investigation. They did a pretty good job. This was done quietly by the Intelligence Committee, and then kind of some of it was repeated out loud in open hearings. But, actually they interviewed a large number of people in very short period of time. Those depositions, if you take the time to read them, and I actually read all of them because Lawfare, we summarized every single one. That's a pretty professional investigation done with limited tools, because they couldn't compel people's presences, but they had a bunch of cooperating witnesses, and they were done expertly, and they actually developed the record. Now, the Senate ultimately chose to ignore it. So you can say, well, it failed in that sense. But I don't, the House's job was not to convince the Senate that the president should be removed. The House's job was to lay the evidence in front of them. And I actually think they did that. So I actually think one of the big lessons is, honestly, don't do, public hearings are overrated a lot of the time. These private depositions are very useful, and go develop the record and then release it. I don't know. I think there's more to be said for what the House. I'm kind of with Norm on this. There's both on the Judiciary Committee side and in the Intelligence Committee side. There's more to be said for the House's institutional performance than commonly gets said.
I want to hear, Jonathan, do you have, yeah.
I was just going to point out the Burr Committee did mighty fine work too. There's still a lot of, maybe we're workshopping our elevator pitch. There's still a lot of democratic capacity in the United States, a lot of institutional capacity, a lot of norms and values that are still there. So the question is, how do we strengthen those? How do we move the needle in a positive direction? And there are going to be lots of different answers to that, but maybe that's the right way to think of it.
But like for Jonathan, like you were talking earlier about like civics level engagement, which I completely agree with. Like I feel like that is like, I support that all the time. And in fact, I specifically support starting to build tech into democratic mechanisms of civics engagement, because like that is the future of how we're going to do civics, is going to involve tech. But that is a very different level than the level that Norm and Ben are talking about, which is at the congressional level, which does imply to me like party politics and a lot of really different kind of mechanisms to get those situations into place. And those like, I mean, like for better or for worse, Norm, like I'm not like saying that's like a good thing, but I just like, those hearings don't come about unless the politics are necessarily in the right place. And or like maybe I'm wrong, but like, that's always been my impression.
Anne?
There was a sigh. Thank you.
I know.
Hi, everyone.
That was a sigh of... I was going to make a Norm violation joke. The sigh of Norm's being that's going to get weird sounding. I'll just stop there. Norm, Anne, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. First, I just want to say 100% yes to Jonathan on this being the weakening or the quavering of democracy. This is a structural problem, at least in part, right? Perhaps made worse by COVID, but and I support that claim with books such as How Democracies Die, How They End. I don't know. Democracy Sucks. Wait, that's not a real one, but I had to change screens. So, but there were a host of books predicting and bemoaning the weakening of democracy. Right, a lot of it had to do with not just Trump's election, but other elections around the globe. So I would also introduce the globe into this. Right, I know that you can't do everything, and I'm not suggesting you worry about democracy all around the world, but it's not just here. Right, that there's a lack of faith in democracy, democratic institutions. So my question is, that lack of faith in or support for democratic norms and institutions is particularly strong among young people, according to polls and according to my classrooms at college where I teach. And I'm curious if you've thought about that at all and why you think that might be the case and what we can do about it.
I will say, just parenthetically, that the last time that I had this desire to have keep the band together, I helped found another international organization that worries about this stuff, the Transatlantic Democracy Working Group, which thinks about democracy.
You were going to say the Beatles.
Which thinks about, I wish. So there is, and we just had a very big series of successes on policies that we had worked on, including the Belarus-related provisions of the omnibus spending bill that just moved. So, but that was parenthetical. I think we now need to rewrite the library, and everybody has to update to write books about how democracy survived. And the worst pessimism has not been borne out. And one of the things I love about lawfare is Ben and colleagues' very contrarian views. When people have periodically proclaimed the sky is falling, and Ben says, well, only a piece of the sky is falling. Yeah, exactly. Actually, the rest of the sky seems to be holding up incredibly. And I do think the era, and this is part of what John and I are looking at as we think about the thesis, the hypothesis that we're testing, is a lot of our democratic institutions, amazingly, John has even gone so far as to praise Don McGahn in some of his recent work. I can't go that far since I sued him when I was working in the House. But a lot of our democratic, McGahn was in many ways an unexpected hero of democracy. And I say that having fought his campaign finance views for seemingly my entire adult life. So there were a lot of heroes. And what happened in this election season, the difference between the country basically agreeing, a supermajority agreeing as of the Electoral College that Biden was the president, and total chaos and conflict and a kind of cold or legal system civil war was Republican officials all over the country who did not cave. The Brian Kemps, the Doug Duceys, the less well-known analogs, AGs, secretaries of state like Raffensperger, people like Aaron Van Langeveld, the Republican member of the Michigan Board of State Canvassers, who sided with the two Democrats to give the majority to certify the election. I mean, there's a group now it's a small group. If 12 Republicans had gone the other way, we would be in this period of total constitutional crisis and chaos. So you hate for your democracy to have to eke out based on 12 righteous Republicans. But I say thank God for them, and they're a reflection of a deeper strength in the system. And every chapter of Trump's challenges, and even Trump himself, he himself has not been willing. He has yet to go as far as Andrew Jackson and say John Roberts has. Was it Worcester v. Georgia? Was that the case that where Andrew Jackson?
That Jackson, yes, that he challenged.
Was Worcester v. Georgia? It was those two missionaries in Georgia who had been imprisoned because of the Indian lands. He says, Marshall has issued his decision. Now let him enforce it. Trump has not gone that far at no point. Even Trump has internalized it to some extent. He's pressed on him very hard, but he hasn't violated the norms of the rule of law. So how do we keep those wins as well, John? That's part of our problem.
So I agree with almost all of that, but I do want to distinguish between virtue and righteousness on one hand and the absence of lawlessness on the other hand. When you say without 12 righteous Republicans, I say this as somebody who's probably to your right on most issues. I'm not sure. I mean, Langeveld and Brian Kemp deserve credit for not being lawless actors, but I'm not sure I would confuse that with great virtue.
This is the difference between me, a sometime activist, and you, a principal analyst. I'm an occasional analyst and you're an occasional activist. You cannot imagine the pressure that a party regular, obviously I have my party affiliations, that a party regular feels when everybody from the president on down is squeezing them and they have to go the other way. That's more than the mere absence of lawlessness.
Okay.
That is an act of political heroism.
Okay, that's what they signed up for. Like, if you don't want to, when I got my driver's license, I signed up for hitting the brake hard when somebody wanders out into the street, and maybe that's frickin' scary, but that's what you signed up for when you got a driver's license. And, you know, I don't feel like I owe Brian Kemp like a big, I mean, I'm not going to, I was going to say I'm not going to argue with you about it. He says arguing with him about it. But I don't know. I reserve the heroism for the people who were willing to actually give up their careers. You know, the in the politician space, the David Jollies,
I disagree. People... I think that being against your tribe is very hard. And like, I know that we're talking about, like, I think that like it is really the analogy doesn't hold with the driver's license, Ben, because there's no tribe you're joining of drivers. Like, that is not a tribal, like, that is like a strict rule-based designation. And then maybe that's like I don't know, whatever, but it's not tribal. And I think what Norm is talking about is like, it's skin in the game, it's communities, it's people you exchange bottles of wine with in like at the end of the year. It's like who your kids play with. It's like all of these things. But that is to my entire point, which is that at the end of the day, this is all just a very human endeavor. And that like all of those reasons are the reasons that we make some of the political decisions that we make when we vote, and that they have nothing to do with the politics of our party, but have really more to like the politics of the party of the formalism that is like basically wrapped around the tribalism that is like that like Norm is expressing.
I don't disagree with you, and yet I don't want to let go of the distinction between the Justin Amashes and the Brian Kemps.
Let's return to this on a future in lieu of fun. This merits a conversation of its own. Totally. And now we'll hear from our next friend.
Christopher Argyris. We have two more questions. The floor is yours. Jonathan Rauch has turned into a pumpkin. I'm assuming
Did he have to go?
No. He is. He's just pumpkinized. We'll bring him back.
It was the bookends. I was the opening pumpkin, and he's having the end of show challenges.
Jonathan he just didn't like he gets upset when there's conflict, and so you and I were arguing. So Jonathan was just like.
I write a
Christopher, the floor is yours.
All right. Good evening, gentlemen. I didn't alter my original question because I do think it fits with your initiative, but more from a top down than a bottom up approach. So I couldn't resist having, when Norm was on, ask a question about norms, presidential norms. So I wanted to ask what presidential norms would you realistically like to see or codified into law in the next administration or future administrations? And of course, I'm thinking of things like from presidential emoluments or divestiture of personal interest in corporations or companies, and of course, tax return, mandatory tax return for all presidential candidates.
I'm going to talk for 30 seconds. Do we stop at 6 sharp, or do we have more time?
No, we can go over a little bit. We're going to get through Kelly's question.
Can I walk to the fridge and get a snack? Okay, I'm going to answer that question.
Do your 30 seconds first. Then get the snack while Jonathan's talking.
But I'll listen to Jonathan.
The fridge and got a snack.
I saw you vanished, Kate. Because the first intellectual engagement that Rauch and I had when I came to Brookings, incredibly 6 years ago, I don't know how that is possible, was that we disagreed on whether government transparency, extreme radical government transparency, was a good thing or not. And Jonathan believes that a certain amount of, let's call it, political privacy is necessary for government to function, whereas I'm the one who sold candidate Obama on having a webcam, which he went out on the stump and said he would do, and then we had to walk it back in the White House. He would have a webcam for all the healthcare negotiations. And basically, Rahm said to us, "Are you fucking crazy? We're not doing that." Said to me and Barack,
"Have you seen negotiations?"
No, we're not doing that. So I have a Brookings paper and then a Brookings book that will come out on the remedies. Basically, the trick of fixing government after a severe dislocation. This is not the project. This is too practical for the project that Rauch and I are interested in. The trick of fixing government after a severe dislocation is to figure out what the crisis taught you about the next crisis. Don't solve the particulars of the last crisis because they're over. We're not going to have another emolumentary president anytime soon. But what did we learn about the weaknesses in the system that have to be addressed going forward? That's the hard thing. So too many people are saying, oh my God, we've got to codify emoluments in a statute. I'm more interested in, were we too modest in EIGA and the Ethics in Government Act, the post-Nixon Ethics in Government Act, in pushing the constitutional envelope on applying ethics rules to presidents in general? What additional ethics rules can we apply? What better disclosures can we mandate? Disclosures are clearly constitutional. So that's what I'll say. I'm in the midst of writing a big paper about the big 5 or so things we need to do. I'll give you a hint that one of them is we need to stop looking at domestic ethics, transparency, and accountability, and in the international variety as 2 separate issues. We need to have a unified field theory of anti-corruption in government. So there's a set of problems like that, and I'll have specific. I'm thinking it through. We have the very good Lawfare book by Jack Goldsmith and Bob Bauer.
Amazing.
They have really, really thought these issues through, and that is a very smart book. So I'm standing on their shoulders, but I am continuing to think about these problems. Jonathan?
This is your chance, Norm.
It better be a quick snack because I don't have answers on this one either. Everything Norm just said, I'm a big fan of Jack and Bob's book, at least though I haven't read the actual book. Personally, I've read a lot about it. I've heard them speak. It seems like everything they propose is worth doing. But in a way, this is the same conversation that Norm and I are having more broadly, which is there's only so much you can do by writing norms into law and saying, well, we'll deal with the tax return issue. We'll deal with the defying subpoenas issue. We'll do something about pardons. So, yeah, let's do all of that. But that's possibly deck chairs on the Titanic if the fundamentals are eroding. So the bigger question is, what are the fundamentals? Why are they eroding and how can we fix them? And that gets us back to where we started, which is where are the gaps that can be filled there? Can we put people in better touch with each other so that ideas float to the top? We can find out what works. So it's to me, it's really the same question. And the big social fundamentals and the big political fundamentals are hard, but there are tons and tons of really good ideas out there. Just tons of good ideas. Everything from educational changes to making changes in the way the primaries work, disinformation, what's going on with platforms, internet. I mean, you name it. There's no shortage of really smart people and really good ideas. The question is, can we weave that into a fabric?
That
Kelly,
is the question.
You get the last question today. Oh, but you got to unmute we got to unmute you. There you go.
Unmute. All right.
You're good.
Glad to be here. I remember, I was born in 1954, so I came of age, end of the Vietnam War and into my teens, smoking weed, watching the Watergate hearings and like that. And I remember the day they buried Nixon, I was infuriated because Bill Clinton spoke kindly of him. So, that's how long I was mad. I was mad for 20 years about that, and spoiled everyone around me's day that day by how angry I was, about Bill Clinton saying something nice about Nixon. And what I was mad about was that they let him off, that Ford pardoned him. And I've come to accept that perhaps that was the right thing to do. But right now, I don't see how this. It almost seems like there needs to be some kind of a reboot of the idea that no one is above the law. I think I've lived long enough to see every branch and aspect of government fail, and sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 at a time, and I wonder what we can do with the executive branch right now, and if maybe the rule of law stuff needs to be a point needs to be put on that.
I'll give the last word to Rauch. I took my fair share of words.
What do you think, Rauch? At the end of the day, are you on Team Bob Bauer for prosecute the motherfucker, or Team Jack for can't we all just get along?
Which, by the way, I was a little bit surprised to see that Team Jack came out that way. Like a little bit surprised.
No, I mean I'm very much distorting both of their positions, or caricaturing both of them.
But I agree with the caricatures, and I'm just saying that, like, when you reduce it down to that, I was a little bit surprised they took those two different positions.
My considered opinion is to agree with however Ben Wittes comes out on this difficult question.
Suck up.
I think it's a very non-obvious question.
It is a very
it's an extremely, it's like there's some other issues like this, abortion. Anyone who thinks it's obvious has not thought it through. So I don't know, but in response to, what was the caller's name?
Kelly.
In response to Kelly, we're not going to have a reboot. We don't do reboots in this system. What we're going to have, if this works out, and I think ultimately it probably will, but it's going to be all kinds of people, all kinds of efforts working at every level of society, as we've done in the past. We do things the Tocqueville way in America when things work. And so it's not going to be because Norm Eisen and Jonathan Rauch and Ben Wittes and Kate Klonick come up with the it. It's going to be because people who care and who have ideas on the ground can organize and implement those ideas and spread them.
All right, so I have put the question to you all as a poll.
I think you guys want to go small. You talk big, but I think you want an in-person grassroots problem. I think that is not grassroots, but I think it's I think you want to address this on the smaller individual scale that you're more interested in that than the political scale. Sorry, Ben. I totally cut you off. I didn't realize there was a lag.
No problem. I guess
I'm watching a race between yes at the federal level, yes, but at the state level. That
no is really down below. My honest answer to this question is that it is enormously fact dependent, and that is one of the reasons I actually think that we need a attorney general who is of sufficient stature that we will actually care what he or she thinks.
Meaning Merrick Garland?
Well, Merrick Garland is one. I mean, I also think very highly of Lisa Monaco. I mean, there's a lot of people you could name, but I think it is important that when this person goes out and gives a press conference and says, I have reopened this matter, or I am not reopening this matter, and here's why, that the not 100%, because there's going to be 40% of people who think this is, but that there be a solid group of people who are actually, emotionally capable of saying, this may not be, saying what Kelly is able to say 20 years later about Jerry Ford, but was not able to say then. And I want somebody to be able to say, I want as many people as possible to say, boy, this doesn't feel right to me, but I actually trust Jonathan Rauch to make this decision in an impartial fashion. And I may not agree with it, but John Rauch is the kind of person who I would want making this decision, and that means something to me. And
but that's so much more like a belief in a Republican democracy than it is in a democracy. Like if Kelly had his way, Ford would not have pardoned Nixon at the time, and 20 years later, who knows how Kelly would have felt, but that would have been what happened, because Kelly would have voted for Nixon to not be pardoned, and that would have gone forward. And let's assume that he wouldn't have been pardoned. Do you see what I'm saying? So
yes,
there's a difference here.
And further to that point, we've had a vote on in lieu of fun, and that should be binding. It has in our de Tocquevillian.
Actually, I'm fine with the in lieu of fun vote. Yes, but at the state level one, if Tish James wants to or Cy Vance wants to indict Donald Trump, have at it. I got no dog in that fight. You better be able to prove your case in court.
Here's the elegance of doing that. No matter how independent, and you don't need to have necessarily an attorney general of that stature, because the attorney general can bring in someone else of that stature and say, look, I'm setting up so-and-so is going to make this decision. They were a Republican attorney general, what have you. But no matter who does it at the federal level, it's going to have the taint of retribution. And I just don't. It's the ultimate, to me, it's the ultimate norm. Let it play out at the state level. That gives you the independence, the insulation, the non-political. These are non-political issues at New York State.
So I actually totally, my point was about federal action at the federal level. And I actually totally agree with you that there's no, Donald Trump's business in New York is a matter of New York state jurisdiction. And, I don't think we don't have a principle in the U.S. of not prosecuting people under state law after they leave office. That is not actually a norm of our federal system. Just ask Aaron Burr, who, even as sitting vice president, didn't go near this too close to the state of New Jersey after he murdered somebody in it. All right, we're going to leave it there.
Who? Wait, Aaron Burr murdered someone?
Yes. That would be a yes. All right.
You know what Aaron Burr used to say when he was running for president? Even if I shot someone in broad daylight
on Liberty Island,
it would not affect my ability to secure the presidency or vice presidency.
That's right. All right, we have run over.
Affected his ability to stand the presidency or the vice president.
Yeah, and Burr, by the way, was prosecuted federally after he left office too. So he was afraid, even in office, of state authorities, and he was prosecuted federally for treason, no less, after he left office, though he was acquitted. All right. Kate, we don't know who our guest is tomorrow, but that's because we haven't heard from Ann Kornhauser about whether. No,
I contacted her and I'm waiting to hear back. So it's on me now, but she hasn't responded. But we'll figure it out.
So we're going to figure out tomorrow's guest, but we will do that as we have done 271 days in a row. John Rauch, Norm Eisen, you are both great Americans. You're going to sharpen this elevator pitch. You're going to take it on the road. And everybody who watches in lieu of fun will be able to say, as they will with Venmo, when Venmo becomes our sponsor,
or
we
Zelle.
were in on
or
the ground
Zelle.
floor of this.
Thank you.
And until then,
everybody.
We'll be back 22 hours and 46 minutes from now. And until then, we don't have fun anymore, but we will have Venmo or Zelle or the Cash App as a sponsor. See you later.
Right. Bye.